Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third forum of this academic year. We have an especially impressive array of presenters today with quite diverse and interesting topics. Our first presenter is Dr. Sheila Nowinski, who is in her third year here as an assistant professor of history. She has presented at other Thiel Forums, and we're happy to welcome her back today as she reflects on her participation in a seminar on British and American landscape art at the Yale Center for British Arts. We look forward to her presentation on landscape and identity in Britain and the United States. Dr. Nowinski.
Try and get this. All right. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. I'm excited to share what I did this summer at Yale Center for British Art in New Haven. First, I want to thank the VPAA's office for their support, faculty development grant that paid for my travel to get to New Haven. The CIC is the Council of Independent Colleges, and the Samuel Kress Foundation that ran this seminar, and the Yale Center for British Art, which gave us a very warm welcome. The CIC runs an annual seminar on teaching European art in context. And this summer, the Yale Center hosted that seminar. Just a quick word about the Yale Center. The Yale Center for British Art was endowed by Paul Mellon in 1966. Paul Mellon was the son of Andrew Mellon, the famous philanthropist, industrialist, and financier. Andrew Mellon founded and donated the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. He's largely responsible for that institution. And so, following in his father's footsteps, Paul became an art collector. It was sort of later in his life that he came to British art. Paul Mellon's mother was English. He spent a lot of time in England as a boy. He studied there. After he graduated from Yale in 1929, he studied in Cambridge. He studied English literature, so he was sort of an Anglophile. But it was only later in his life that he came to British art as a collector. He was advised by a British art historian who sort of said, hey, listen, British art's sort of undervalued and underappreciated. So it was really his efforts as a collector that made British art, so put British art on the map as something worthy of study and collecting. So over the course of the 1950s and 1960s, Paul Mellon amasses this collection. And in 1966, as I said, he donated them to Yale and created this Yale Center for British Art. Louis Kahn, the famous architect, created this building. It's across the street from the Yale Art Gallery, which is another its own sort of renowned collection, one of the top collections in the country. So, but it is its own sort of institution. So there's the picture of the group. Mandatory group photo of the CIC participants, and this is just an image of the gallery to give you an idea of what the center is like. Let's see. The seminar was led by this fellow, Tim Barringer, who's the Paul Mellon Chair for British Art at Yale, and they were very, very welcoming. And I would say for the faculty that are here, if you have an opportunity to do a CIC seminar, I highly recommend it. And one of the nice things, it was a surprise for me, I didn't really expect going into this, but it was just great to connect with other small college faculty at different stages in their careers, and we were just sort of talking about our work. It was really well. We all sort of talked at the end, like we kind of thought Yale, they might be kind of snobby, but they weren't. They were really, really welcoming. They were so glad to have us here looking at the art and sharing their collection with us, so that was really special. So on the first day, we were in our little conference room. It's sort of too small for the group our size, and you're sort of like balancing your notebook and a little cup of coffee, and we're waiting, like Tim Barringer's gonna start talking soon, and he starts in, and he says, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you guys do such important work. You guys are saving the world. You small college professors are saving the world, and of course, we're all kind of like, well, sure, okay. And I think that's very nice for him to say. But as he goes on, I think I understood what he meant. And what he was saying was that the question that he's really thinking about as an art historian looking at British and American landscape painting is how those pieces of artwork, how this work engages the public with questions, really the most important question of our era, which is environmental degradation and climate change. And he said if we can engage the public in these kind of questions using landscape painting, then we're really doing important work. And thinking about today, what to prepare and what to talk about today, I came back to that moment to talk about, in part because it has come back in different settings. Prior to this seminar, I was actually at the American Historical Association meeting in January, and the outgoing president, Patrick Manning, made a similar kind of appeal, saying, like, historians, social scientists, the most pressing question of our time is human inequality and its contribution to environmental degradation. And of course, last week, with Reformation 500 and Cindy Mo Leveda, Christian ethicist, talking about, I remember she said something, right, like human gifts. How can using our human gifts to meet this challenge of climate catastrophe, as she called it. So here it was, and Tim Berenger saying, you know, art history is a matter of life and death. And I thought, wow, all right, let's go, let's do this. So I'll talk a little bit more about him and his work there. They said they're so welcoming. They opened up the study room to us and allowed us to just sort of paw through their collections. The archivists and workers there were very, very kind. I think they had a really stressful day, though, with all of us piling through their collections. Then in addition to, of course, the great paintings, they have all sorts of works on paper, watercolors, prints, and drawings that they allowed us to see and cover. So I'm going to start with a work that's not actually in the Yale Center for British Art's collection. It's actually at the Met. And maybe you know this painting. It's Thomas Cole's The Oxbow. I have the full, let's see. Let me see the full title. View from Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, after a thunderstorm, The Oxbow. So it's a longer title. And he started with this painting, and it's really the jewel of the Metropolitan's collection of American art. And he said it's, you know, this is Cole's masterwork, and it represents the foundation of like American landscape painting, right? Cole has been this progenitor of American landscape painting and American art. But his argument was not to see Cole so much as an American artist, as a sort of progenitor of American art, but as engaged in a transatlantic conversation about landscape and social change, I would say. Thomas Cole was born in 1801 in England, and he emigrated to the United States with his family when he was 18 years old, so in 1819. And he was actually born in a town called Bolton, Lancashire, which was really at the center of the Industrial Revolution. In 1801, it was really at the center of the Industrial Revolution. This is a watercolor from the Yale Center collection by Turner, of Turner's hometown, which was Leeds, in 1816. So just a few years after, really contemporaneous with Cole's youth. And this really gives you an image of how the Industrial Revolution was changing the British landscape, the English countryside. Leeds is about 45 miles from Bolton, and it was connected by these toll roads. You can see here, right, the roads that are going to be actually being built. You see the smokestacks, right, this new industrializing country. And Turner, I think, is really ambivalent about those changes, and so is Cole. Bolton, Cole's hometown, features in Frederick Engel's tour of England and the English working classes, of the working towns, and he sort of says it sounds like a sort of terrible place. I have a quote here from Engels on the condition of the working class. Bolton, 11 miles northwest of Manchester, is one of the worst of these towns. Is very, so far as I've been able to observe in my repeated visits, there's one main street, it's a very dirty one, which serves as a market, and even in the finest weather, a dark, unattractive hole, in spite of the fact that, except for the factories, its sides are formed by very low and 1- or 2-story houses. So these are dark places, people live in cellars, a sort of ruinous and miserable kind of town where Cole and his family came from. It's also the center, Bolton and Lancashire, of the Luddite movement. The first Luddite attack, right, these are craftsmen who destroy the machines that are threatening their work. And this is an engraving from 1812, just after the first real Luddite attack, that is in Cole's hometown, describing this the arson that's destroyed one of the mills. And that's sort of the real mythical leader, Ned Ludd, of the Luddites. And he's there, you can see him, he's wearing a calico dress. Those are the dresses that were produced in these milled cheap printed calico. One of Cole's first jobs, Cole comes from kind of middle class background, but his father, they're like downwardly mobile. His father kind of can't get his act together, and everything he gets involved in kind of fails. One of Cole's first jobs is actually as an engraver, engraving blocks that print on the calico. But of course that work is replaced by machine printing in the calico. So even Cole himself is sort of caught up in this changing economy. Cole and his family, they move to Liverpool. After they leave Bolton, they go to Liverpool. There he's working in an engraver's print for a while, about a year, and then the family moves to America, in Philadelphia, and then in New York. And there Cole's career takes off as a painter. He's gotten this artistic, self-taught artist coming out of engraving school. He's done these engravings. He goes up into the wilderness now, into Hudson Valley, into New England, and he paints these landscapes. And he becomes very popular in New York, and sort of his career takes off. He makes some money. And this is an example of one of those landscapes. I'm not sure the projection is so great, but and so this is supposed to be this Cole and his sort of followers. He's like embodies this new American spirit, right? This the connection, a spiritual connection to the wilderness, and his admirers really like this about his art. Cole makes enough money that he can actually take a trip back to Europe and do the Grand Tour, get that artistic education. And in 1829, he does just that. And this is sort of the crux of the argument, right? That he goes back to Europe and he gets that artistic education and he brings it back to America. And there he meditates on the changing landscapes of the United States at the time. When he gets to England, Cole rushes from Portsmouth to London to catch the last day of the exhibit at the Royal Academy. Of course, he's rushing, it's the last day, and he makes it time to see John Constable's Hadley Castle. John Constable is by now a really famous and well-established British landscape painter. And Constable comes from a kind of country gentry, and he's very nostalgic for a kind of England that's fading away, the England that's being replaced by the Industrial Revolution. And this is a piece that's really personal. It's following the premature death of his wife. So it's a sort of personal meditation on sort of solitude and loneliness, but also the sort of decay and decline of the England view. Cole sees this painting and he goes back to it. He sketches it, he goes back to it fairly often. He spends some time with Constable too, in particular picking up some techniques from Constable, particularly the oil sketch that Constable does sketches in paint. That's unusual, and Cole will bring that technique back with him. He also goes to Turner's gallery. Turner and Constable are the two big names in British painting at the time, although they're very, very different, and they don't get along very well. This is an earlier painting of Hannibal crossing the Alps, right? And Turner in the sublime, the sort of terror and wonder of nature. But this Cole would have seen in Turner's studio when he visited Turner's studio. But Turner was sort of a crotchety guy and didn't have anything to do. Wasn't very helpful, I should say. So he's in London, he passes through Paris quickly, he goes to Rome, and he sees, the classical, he's sketching the classical nudes and all that stuff when he goes there. When he comes back to the United States, Cole, it's 1832. Andrew Jackson has just been elected president. There's a new inaugurated in a new era in the country, westward expansion, the removal of indigenous peoples. And what we see is like Cole has gone, sort of taken in all of this history and all this great cycle of histories, but he's remembering his youth, really at the center of British industrialization and also British Empire. Thinking about working on those calico, that cotton textiles being imported from the slave economy in the American South that's then exported around the world. So he's thinking about those things, and he creates a series of 5 paintings called The Course of Empire. And I have all 5 here, so I'll take you through them quickly. They're at the New York Historical Society now. The first is called The Savage State, and again, I apologize, the projection might not be so well, but here it's a kind of, nature. We have that mountaintop, the sublime, just like Hannibal's. Hannibal's that storm crossing, chasing Hannibal across the Alps is there. A reference here, you can see these look like teepees, a kind of American indigenous Indians. But then our historians have said, look, here are sort of classical-looking figures, like not necessarily an indigenous other, but maybe a European pre-civilization kind of thing. Here in the Savage State, and a kind of Arcadian, mythical, pastoral scene. So I think civilization has advanced somewhat. Stonehenge there. So again, it's not necessarily the other. It's Europeans themselves he's meditating on. And then the culmination of empire here. And this is the biggest of the paintings. And here, this is like really a detailed, panoramic, amazing kind of painting, amazing kind of skill that he's created. A lot of these elements, though, are things you could have seen in London or in Liverpool, for that matter. These sort of the classical goddess kind of put on top of a building. These big rotunda, the neoclassical facades. There's something about the Waterloo Bridge in London that's being constructed in commemoration of the British, the English conquest, defeat of Napoleon. This emperor parading across it, who looks, maybe a little bit ridiculous right now. So this course of empire, we have the culmination of empire, and maybe Cole reflecting on the British Empire and the growth of European civilization here directly. And then, of course, the ruination and destruction. Cole drawing upon maybe some of his background as a dissenter in the dissenting churches, a kind of fire and brimstone Christianity, the wrath of God, drawing on earlier kind of biblical paintings as well, right? And it's interesting here, this seems to be like an ecological kind of disaster. It's not just a war, but also a kind of ecological disaster. And then the desolation, right, the end here. Nature has taken it back. I'm probably going on too long, so I should cut this short. So desolation, the nature is taken back, and so he does these 5 paintings, and in fact, while he's painting them, to come back to the, there's Hadley Castle again, right? As he's painting them, and particularly as he's painting that culmination, he's really frustrated and he can't get any work done. So at that point he actually paints the oxbow. He goes back to the sketches in North End, and he paints the oxbow there. It's on the same size canvas. It's a big canvas as the other one. And part of the preparations for this new show, they X-rayed it, or infrared it. And they found the sketches for that culmination underneath the oxbow. And they said it's really strange because it's all the straight lines of that architecture underneath the nature that's going on here, right? So even here where you have the cultivated land, here is like land brought under cultivation. Here's the wild wingwood. You can see it's almost like he was a premonition of the sort of sewer systems and road systems and all of that grid that's going to be put onto this landscape by successive generations. My mother's family is from not so far from here, from Northampton. Interstate 91 kind of cuts through the landscape just in that way. Like he really, it was prophetic in some way. And so in some, what Berenger said, and I think he's pretty convincing, this idea that those 5 paintings were just all in this one painting, right? He boiled it down in this, and then this is the American landscape. This is, what he's asking in some way. Americans, what are you going to do? How are you going to meet this challenge of industrialization, civilization, and expansion? And I think he was maybe pessimistic about how it turned out in Europe. So maybe thinking about landscape painting as a way for us to answer these questions about economic and social change and environmental degradation and environmental changes. I thought it was a really exciting way to look at art history and look at this landscape paintings. For me, it was a whole new lens. I'll leave it at that.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Nowinski?
I went a little long, sorry. Questions? Yeah.
The presentation was very thorough. How long was the workshop?
Oh, it was a week.
Just 1 week? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
They were, I think it was about a week. We had workshops and then we were in the galleries and we took a field trip to the Hudson River.
Okay, so this wasn't a huge.
No.
Okay. Oh, great.
Thank you, that was wonderful. Thank you, Sheila. Our next presenter is Dr. Dain Claussen, Professor of Communication and Pedas Endowed Chair in Communication since 2015. He's also presented at Thiel Forums, usually on his travels abroad. Today he'll talk to us about his recent travels to Angkor Wat in Cambodia, one of the world's premier anthropological sites and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I'm happy to present my colleague, Dr. Claussen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I went to Cambodia a couple of years ago, and I wanted to see Angkor Wat, and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but let me give you just a bit of background. Cambodia is in Southeast Asia. It's bordered by Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. It is not as big as it is here. This was Cambodia at its heyday in about 900 to 1300 AD, and Cambodia is just now today a fraction of the size of the big purplish red area there. The capital is Phnom Penh, has a population of about 15 million. Official religion is Buddhism, which is about 95% of the population. It's constitutional monarchy officially, although it's basically a communist dictatorship in practice, although the economy is quite capitalistic. Current problems in Cambodia include widespread poverty, pervasive corruption, lack of political freedoms, low human development, a high rate of hunger, and also ecological disaster, primarily from deforestation. Fortunately, I did not get wrapped up in the pervasive corruption while I was there. So anyway, Cambodia was actually ruled by France for about 90 years, became independent in 1953. It soon became wrapped up in the what became known to the Americans as the Vietnam War, and it was a real mess. There was a guerrilla group called the Khmer Rouge. They deposed the king in 1970. He then supported them. They took over Phnom Penh in 1975. The great genocide of Cambodia happened 1975 to 1979. And then the current leader has been around since 1997 with a couple people in between. I didn't go to Phnom Penh, but I talked to people who were there, and they said the place is just kind of eerie. And I said, "What's eerie about it?" And they said, "Well, I'm not really quite sure, but you can sort of tell that this was a place where like everybody who had any intelligence or education were all killed, and all the farmers moved in and took over the city." But anyway, Angkor Wat is near the second biggest city in the country, which is called Siem Reap, and I was able to fly in directly to Siem Reap from, I guess I flew in from Tokyo. Anyway, I went through Tokyo one way and Seoul another. Anyway, what is Angkor Wat? Well, Angkor Wat is the world's largest religious temple, current or past. and it was constructed as a Hindu temple for the god Vishnu in the Khmer Empire in the 1100s and 1200s. It was built by a king named Surya Yarvaman II, presumably as his tomb, or maybe at least for his son. Which gets us to something else. There is almost no written records of the Khmer Empire from 900 to 1300. The only written records there are records were written down by Chinese travelers, and then those records got deposited back in China. Basically, all the records that were in the Khmer Empire were all lost, except for ones that were engraved in stone on buildings and other structures. So anyway, with that, this is the historic big empire, and this is the national park. Angkor Wat that we hear about is just this little square here. It's about 400 square acres. Angkor Thom is actually much bigger and was a longtime capital of the Khmer Empire. I had the opportunity to basically see all of this over the course of, almost all of this over the course of 3 days, and this entire park is hundreds and hundreds of structures spread out over thousands of acres. You know, you can't walk it. I hired a driver to get around, and that worked out quite well. So this is Angkor Wat at sunrise. It's a big tourist attraction, and people sort of hope the sun will come up right behind one of the towers there, but that actually, of course, doesn't happen because that only happens certain times of the year. You can see all the tourists gathered around for the sunrise over Angkor Wat. And but anyway, when you are moving towards the temple, the temple is behind a wall, which is there's a moat, and then there's another wall, and then there's a courtyard, and then there's another wall, and then and it's just a series of structures within structures within structures. That's why it takes up 400 acres. This is the moat. Here's a couple of guys fishing in the moat, and so this is the local folks. You see the steps going down to the moat for bathing and also for aesthetic reasons. This is the outer ring around Angkor Wat, and you go through doorways and down hallways to get through it into the inner area. You see the architecture is very similar, but we'll see some different architecture later. Here's a Buddha all dressed up inside the first ring. Here we are walking toward the temple from the outer ring, the outer structure, and it's quite a little hike. There's little side structures all over the place. Here's a local Cambodian making some money by giving children horse rides, for assuming that they'd never been on a horse before. Anyway, all these buildings are outer buildings of temples, but there's no real records of exactly what they were used for or why. Obviously, some archaeologists have some theories, but there's just structure after structure after structure. These look like bars of a jail, but these are actually window protectors or whatever. I mean, they're actually carved out of solid stone. So apparently the Cambodians, ancient Khmer, didn't think that made them feel like they were in jail. Every square inch of Angkor Wat is covered by carvings. It's just basically they're everywhere, and even when they're not there, they were there. You could walk around along hundreds and hundreds of yards of carvings like this that go from floor to ceiling. All the way around the temple, and it's just endless. You could actually just spend days and days and weeks just trying to see everything that's in the structures. You see that the walls are made out of multiple stones, and they just carried over the carving from one stone to the next. So the stones all up close, you can tell that it's stones meeting each other, but a little bit farther away, it just looks like continuous carving on a continuous surface. Here's looking back at sort of the outer ring from the inner ring. There's a balloon up in the air. Some tourists are getting a balloon ride. I didn't do that. Anyway, all of the carvings are meant to sort of glorify, obviously, the kings. There's lots of carvings of elephants and great efforts by huge numbers of people, like down here in the bottom, all supporting the king and so on and so forth, which gets us to something else. Angkor Wat took 37 years to build and an estimated 300,000 people working on it. And when it was abandoned, the construction of it was abandoned after 37 years, it still was not finished. So this, it puts you in the mind of, like, building pyramids or things like that, right? There's just a ridiculous amount of time and effort and energy. Also, the stones that Angkor Wat is built from were all brought in from 50 kilometers away, dragged by elephants on the ground, which is also rather astonishing, right? So, anyway, carvings, I sometimes don't show up too well in the photographs, I'm sorry, but gives you some idea of the size and scope and diversity and just beauty. Angkor Wat is praised for both its detail and its overall grandeur. It is one of the premier archaeological sites in the world, as Mary Teresa said, and a great tourist destination. In fact, there's getting to be too many tourists there. Although I was there when there wasn't. So here we are, like, now in the inner courtyard. Now we're right up against the wall of the temple, and you get some idea of the height of the structure, the size of this, and every block, every piece of stone was dragged there from 50 kilometers away. It's still an active temple. I managed to catch a monk out on a ledge. There was another monk. I think you can see part of him going into the building. So it's also unique in that it's an archaeological site, but still an active religious center as well. So you see inside, you see scattered Buddhas around the building, also always wrapped in gold cloth, various flowers, and so on and so forth. The Angkor Wat was subject to a huge amount of looting, both during the Vietnam versus Cambodia War, but also earlier. And so you walk around and you see things like Buddha missing his head, Buddha missing his head, Buddha missing his head, and so on. And looters basically chopped Buddha's head off of everything they could chop his head off of, and then those were sold on the black market around the world. Anyway, there's just these are enclosed walkways here on the right as part of the inner ring up on the temple level. You can see now we're beginning to look down and getting more idea of the height. You can't go up into any of these towers, but you obviously can appreciate them from afar. There's some text here that was carved at some point, but unfortunately there's no translation for the locals and for the tourists. Probably the locals don't know what it says either. Anyway, it's just this massive structure that is accommodating both tourists and also monks and other Buddhist worshippers. A little bit of construction going on, preservation, but there's not much in the way of actual artifacts around. Pretty much everything that could get carried away got carried away. This is sort of, we have locals wanting to get paid to entertain you. It's an active tourist place. If you're a tourist or a researcher or anybody, you're going to get approached with services or goods. This is a cemetery for monks that's right outside, that's actually on the Angkor Wat grounds. I saw these in many places in Cambodia, and I've also been to Thailand and so on, and this is a common sight. Here's Angkor Wat from virtually the same location as before daybreak, but in mid to late afternoon. This silhouette may look familiar. It's on the Cambodian flag. It's also on Cambodian money, and you see it as a sort of a silhouette representing the country in lots of different places in lots of different ways. This is the south gate to Angkor Thom. This is a little ways away, as you saw on the map. And it also goes over a moat, which these are the carvings on the bridge. Some of these are original, some of these are reproductions to replace what was stolen by looters. It also, just the scope of the size and scope of these are just rather flabbergasting. Here's the moat that was dug. Can you imagine doing all of this before bulldozers or cranes or anything? It's just rather mind-blowing. This is the later capital of Khmer Empire, Bayon, and it's just hundreds of structures, and you know, all of them well worn. And Angkor Thom and Angkor Wat were both dug out of deep jungle over the past 100 years or so. This is a reproduction of one of their lion statues that they have there quite intentionally as a reproduction. And this is an original one that hasn't been restored, right next to it. So, how are these buildings built? Well, these buildings in Angkor Thom were a little bit later than Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat was built completely out of sandstone. Angkor Thom was built out of brick and then sandstone carved facings. And so you can see in here that the facing is gone, and that's all that's left is the brick behind it. This was a measure of, an economy measure. Here's some damage that this was, feuds between whether the Buddhists, whether there were Buddhist images or Hindu images. And the Buddhist images got destroyed by the Hindus, and then they were left that way. So, because Cambodia's had a history of both a Buddhist country and as a Hindu country. Here you can see the brick again with the facing gone. It gives you really an idea of how these buildings are structures are actually constructed. Cambodia is getting help from other countries in the restoration. Here's a sign about some money from China. Another sign touting Chinese help with restoring and preserving the buildings. Also, the Indian government also helped out with this work. I mean, you can imagine that Cambodia can't alone afford to preserve and protect and conserve and restore a structure like Angkor Wat or Angkor Thom. Anyway, seeing all this takes several days. So if you're going to go to Cambodia and see the place, make sure you make time. What's this photo for? Well, you see the holes in the stones. These were where the ropes went through the stone so that the stone could be dragged along the ground by the elephants. I'm going pretty fast here, but anyway, this might look a little bit vaguely familiar, sort of like a tree taking over a structure, and I have a bunch of photos like this. There's me. You can see the size and scope of the trees and the buildings. This structure here was a temple that was featured in the movie Lara Croft Tomb Raider in 2001. With the trees literally taking over the building. So, here's a face that's peeking out from behind a tree. Anyway, I know I'm running out of time here, so. Anyway, this is a later period where the emperors were really running out of money, the kings were really running out of money, and they built the structures completely out of brick. They just dispensed with the stone, and they just went only with brick. I also have seen this in Thailand too, where using too much stone eventually gave way to brick just for economics reasons. But still, you see the carvings even in the brick. They didn't need stone to do the Buddhist carvings. Anyway, just gorgeous, stunning, just endless buildings, endless carvings. This is something else. This is actually on top of a mountain, where they carved figures carved into the creek bed on the top of a mountain. This is a sacred mountain called Cabal Speen, and it's about a mile hike up the mountain, and then when you get to the top of the mountain, you see carved creek beds. And that was their way of saying, you know, this is a sacred mountain, and really calling attention to it. Here's something else that was kind of interesting, a temple in the middle of an artificial lake. So you walk and walk and walk, that's working one way, that's working another way, and eventually you end up in a temple in the middle of an artificial lake. It looks like it was just a temple, but guess what? This is where a hospital was, because it was the waters and the layout of the building was thought to be helpful for health. Anyway, after the end of all this, you need some Cambodia beer. So, anyway, the last thing I'll show you very quick, I know I'm way out of time, is there's this in Siem Reap. There's also the Cambodia War Museum, and this is various collected, you know, helicopters, tanks, howitzers, and various other things from both the Vietnam War and the later Vietnam-Cambodia War. And you walk around here and you see, boy, oh boy, there's stuff here made in China, made in Russia, made in the United States, made in France, and used by all different sides. And the museum is all completely outdoors, so it's not very much for museum curation here. But you get to see all the mines, all the shells, mine-sweeping efforts like in these photographs, army uniforms just hanging up outside and rotting in the winter, in the weather, and so on. And what a memorial that is, right? And then when you're done with that, you can have a nice little picnic on the grounds. So, anyway, and this is the Cambodia Landmine Museum. Anyway, so you get the good and the great of the religious structure, the history, the archaeology, and then the ugliness of the Southeast Asia wars, all in one place. Anyway, thank you.
Anybody, comments, questions for Dr. Claussen?
Yes.
Yeah, I have one. Okay. You mentioned the records. There are very few, if any, written records. Was it destroyed by the Khmer Rouge, or did they never exist to begin with?
They were lost in basically these battles back and forth between Thailand and the Cambodians, and between, I mean, there were just battles over hundreds of years, wars between these, and then also the weather. I mean, anything that was written down and on anything that was degradable was lost.
So it was lost in ancient times, not recently.
No, right, in ancient times, right, not recently. Yeah, and I don't know if I guess I mentioned that there's basically no records at all from about 1300 to 1600, because none of these buildings were all built before then. Later buildings did not have a lot of engravings on them about who built them and why and how great the king was and so on and so forth. And then the Chinese stopped sending so many envoys for emperors and so on and so on, and there's basically this 300-year gap in the record where historians and archaeologists know almost nothing. Yeah. Okay, thank you again.
One of the many things I admire about our faculty and our students is the getting out of the box, so to speak. Whatever things you would think, you think you have someone pretty much figured out, and then you find out they give a presentation on something that's very different. And I think these two presentations exemplify that so well. As I know, our next one will also. Dr. Johnson is our Shakespeare expert. He's our chair and associate professor of English, and he really enjoys making Shakespeare accessible to a contemporary audience. And he also finds other Shakespeare aficionados such as Ian Doescher and Seth Graham-Smith, who uses popular high culture, and he likes to do that, likes to look for that sort of thing. So even though he's a little bit in his mode, he's going to show us something today which is very striking and very different from what we might think of when we think of Shakespeare. So I'm very proud to present my colleague, Dr. Johnson.
I have to show this off.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a version of a talk that I did not too long ago, about 2 weeks ago, at the Ohio Valley Shakespeare Conference. This is a rough summary of the introduction, but nonetheless, it's semi-clever. I mean, I'd give it an 8.
You say so yourself.
If I say so myself. So I begin, and I apologize up front because I've been sick for the past 3 days, and I've taken a lot of Theraflu. And so my wit, I would give it about a 4.
Okay, good to know.
If I were to say so myself. So I'm going to try to stick to the script quite a bit, and then move through the paper and catch you up. So what this is saying refers to this. Bardoliters around the world were hit hard on December 27th, 2016, when the just published modern critical edition of the New Oxford Shakespeare declared that at least 3 of Shakespeare's plays had been co-written by none other than Christopher Marlowe. They happened to be sort of low-hanging fruit in the Shakespeare corpus. They were Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3. Heard of them? Yeah. Not very popular. So under the leadership of Gary Taylor, I represented him as the villain in the crawl. Gary Taylor and his editorial team used this a strategy called Stylo Metrics to identify signatures of different playwrights, and they basically found that Marlowe's signature matches with the Henry VI plays, but they also found that other playwrights are sort of co-writing with Shakespeare in at least 14 other plays. So it's caused a little bit of a stir. And fortunately for fans, Shakespeare has been attributed as an original author of all 7 of the Shakespeare, or all 7 of the Star Wars films. So that's good news, right, for Shakespeare fans out there? Star Wars fans out there, I don't know. So that's the gag. That is the setup that Ian Doescher uses to present his 7 5-act plays that represent all of the Star Wars films. So in contrast to someone like Ben Jonson, who was very interested in maintaining his own sense of authorship, Shakespeare kind of didn't care because he kind of died before he had any chance to sort of stake any claim on his own authorship, on the authorship of his work. And so I begin comparing the two. But I suggest that there's something haunting both the Star Wars films and even the authorship debate regarding Shakespeare, and that is, I'm calling it the Spectre of Shakespeare, and I'm borrowing that from Derrida. I said before that when I gave this presentation initially, it was vastly different, and then I read Derrida because I wanted to think about how to theorize the idea of spectrality. And then I got confused, and did the paper develop-ish? But it certainly took a different direction than what I originally intended. So, like the Jedi spirits of, this is kind of the thesis, Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker that appear to Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi, and the ghost of old King Hamlet, witnessed by Bernardo, Marcellus, Horatio, and Hamlet, Shakespeare haunts the Star Wars universe. In the plays bearing his name, a spectral figure that deconstructs his own authorial identity as he, or rather Doescher, creates it. This particular work, the Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge, blurs the line between high Shakespearean tragedy and blockbuster, reminding readers of the competitive market conditions under which the playwright originally wrote his works, because we tend to elevate Shakespeare as this sort of like high culture artist, right? But he's management, essentially. He's a theater, he's a stakeholder in the company for which he works. So long before Ian Doescher's Shakespeare thought to lay his scene on Tatooine, Dagobah, Bespin, the forest moon of Endor, love Ewoks, the booming metropolis of Coruscant, the volcanic Mustafar, William Shakespeare's theatrical company brought the known world to eager theater audiences in London. So from the places like Scotland to the north, Verona, Venice, and Rome to the south, Vienna and Denmark and Troy to the east. And then some people have thought about how to theorize Prospero's island, and we've gone as far as the New World with that. So Shakespeare is spreading his reach as far as he can with the known world. There is no Shakespeare goes to the moon, but there is Shakespeare goes to apparently the Dagobah system and all sorts of things. So at the end of the Tempest, which we typically think of as Shakespeare's swan song, he has the Prospero character come out, who's no longer in character. The Prospero comes out and says, "But release me from my bands with the help of your good hands," which means to the audience. But then he also says something, "Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project sails," which means, by word of mouth, my project survives. So he's, the actor is imploring the audience to say, "Hey, this is a good show," which was to please. So if I'm taking this idea of Prospero as, the voice of management, the voice of the theater entrepreneur trying to implore people to go to the show, then the project, it becomes less the text and more the entire show, all the machinery involved in the show. So I'm contrasting now Ben Jonson as high artist with Shakespeare as theater entrepreneur, and say, I'm looking at a biography by by David Riggs of Ben Jonson, that basically says that even when he publishes his works in 1616, he is so paranoid about how people interpret the works that he will write in his script, how characters are meant to be played. So he wants to exert control over something that he doesn't have control over. And I'm contrasting Jonson with Shakespeare, who doesn't have a chance to become sort of micromanaging of his own interpretation. Now we get to the point where I start talking about the idea of ghostwriting. And ghostwriting begins with the idea of the ghost. And in both Derrida and in Marjorie Garber, we have two scholars who think of a Shakespeare that never was. So the idea that you can sort of like reach back through time and pull out the Shakespeare, the original Shakespeare as author, is illusory and naive and something that both of them reject. And so the idea about wishing that you could find and justify Shakespeare's legitimacy doesn't even make sense in that context, because it's something that doesn't exist. The moment after Shakespeare dies, it no longer exists, even though there is a text. So I go to the OED because I want to find out, when does ghostwriting first enter the English language? Any guesses?
Long after Shakespeare.
Long after Shakespeare, yes. Yeah. It emerges with the arrival of the Hardy Boys. And that's 1927. So ghostwrite, to write something as a ghostwriter, to act as a ghost. And ghostwriter, a term from the US, a hack writer who does work for which another person takes credit, is where we come up with those terms. But I found something interesting in Doescher's version of Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge, in that Doescher is like self-conscious about the fact that he's a ghostwriter. He's using the brand of Shakespeare, and he uses the idea of ghostwriting in one of the scenes. And I'm going to show you the scene which has nothing to do with ghostwriting. It has to do with Samuel L. Jackson and the Emperor going at it. And the line is fairly insignificant in the context of George Lucas's film.
Master, wouldn't it? I take it General Grievous has been destroyed then. I must say you're here sooner than expected.
In the name of the Galactic Senate of the Republic, you're under arrest, Chancellor.
Are you threatening me, Master Jedi?
The Senate will decide your fate.
I am the Senate.
Not yet. treason, then.
Yeah, sorry about that. I attempted to crop that, and apparently the version kind of messed it up. But in any case, the exchange doesn't get at what Doescher provides for us, which is the idea of ghostwriting. So in this exchange, where the Emperor responds, or Palpatine responds, "I am the Senate," you have Windu challenging Palpatine for a fight, and then Windu responds with, Palpatine says, "You dare threaten me, you Jedi knave." Fine, well, excellent. To which Windu retorts, "I shall not be ghostwriter to your fate. The Senate shall decide what comes for you." And I thought about that, and I was thinking, obviously Doescher is self-conscious about the fact that he's using ghostwriting as a trope in this narrative, and he's sort of like seeing himself as that. Windu employs the term in much the same way Garber understands the term. He puns on ghost, evoking the fact that he is going to kill Palpatine, and then he captures the metatextual dynamics of authorship of the play's ghostwriter Doescher vis-a-vis the Spectre of Shakespeare. So, as we wind down, so I will admit that at the end of this, one of my temptations was I will provide I'll do like a new critical reading where I'll provide on one hand Doescher's ventriloquized Shakespeare versus, To Be or Not to Be, or something like that, like something classic, and then try to evaluate where Doescher stands. And I thought that might be funny, but then I found something else. What's that? Oh, I thought somebody said you should. Maybe I will. So instead, I'll simply say the best moments in Doescher is when he uses the form of the soliloquy, because it gets at something that you don't, that film is in some ways unable to provide unless you talk about sort of voiceover narration, which anyone will tell you is sort of lazy in film. But we all remember, and the clip that I'm sure is going to be like this, so I'm not going to show it. But the clip that I wanted to show was the final moments of Episode 3, where Vader sort of like realizes that he's killed Padme. He awakens, and he has these sort of this apparatus sort of like chaining him down, and he breaks it, and he walks out like Frankenstein, and then he says, "No!" and everybody scoffs and thinks it's really funny. But that moment should be poignant. That is the great moment of the Star Wars tragedy. It's the fall of Anakin Skywalker. And what we seek as an audience is ananoresis. We want to know that Anakin Skywalker feels horrible, right? And so Doescher gives us this great soliloquy. I will not put it on the spectrum. I do not know where it lines up. But in any case, he says he satisfies readers in the sense that he gives us something that we yearn for in Star Wars that we don't get. And when he says, "The taste of hate doth overwhelm my soul, and all is but betrayal, pain, and death. Is this my life, the ending of my days?" So we want to know how little Jake Lloyd turns into awful genocidal maniac, and the soliloquy, I think, gives us a little bit of that. So after recounting some of his missteps and unfortunate consequences, Vader laments, "This life, this horrid, God's forsaken life, hath been but years of endless misery. If this is what we humans may expect, this turmoil that befalls each human life, 'twere better that we slay each newborn babe. This is totally nihilistic. So if this is what human life is like, why don't we just kill ourselves and our children and so forth?" But then the moment where he understands the inevitability of where he is, the fact that he is sort of trapped under the mask, he says, sort of disparagingly, "Yet all these thoughts of further life are vain, for even now death's fingers grasp me tight, and in its cool embrace my spirit rests." See, Anakin Skywalker, he is dead. The tragedy of his life is fulfilled. Here doth he lie, a corpse deceived and lone. So in the moment that he discovers that he's trapped in the mask, he finally realizes not only his isolation from everybody, from humanity, but his isolation from himself. And I would just close with the final 2 sentences or so. The Ghost of Shakespeare provides audiences with the anarchism that Star Wars fans only hope Darth Vader feels at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Vader's awareness of becoming alienated from his former self. Like the imagined ghostwriter, the imagined author ghostwritten by Doescher, the Anakin Skywalker of the beginning of the play becomes spectral, haunting the armored figure of Darth Vader until his death at the hands of the Emperor. Thanks.
Any comments, any questions?
Yes, sir.
Is this something that we can like find and read ourselves or watch? Like you would talk about like the Ghost of Shakespeare, and like is this something that we can find so like we can look at it ourselves?
Yeah, I mean the Doescher books are pretty popular now. You can get digital versions for, I've seen them for like $6 or less. It's fun to read.
Yeah, well it sounded like it, that's why I was wondering. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anything that makes the classics contemporary is wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank all of you very much. I wish you a really happy Thanksgiving holiday and a good Christmas. Our next Thiel Forum will be on January 18th, and we'll have Dr. Melissa Borgia, Dr. Chris Danisky, and Dr. Lana Cooley. So thank you very much for being with us today, and enjoy some refreshments. Compliments of Dr. Franz. Thank you.